Hi there, I'm Tom Field. I'm Senior Vice President of Editorial with Information Security Media Group. Very pleased to welcome you to today's session. The topic is demonstrating the value of your cybersecurity program. I'm delighted to welcome to our virtual stage Dustin Hutchison. He's the Chief Information Security Officer with Pondurance. Now, before I invite Dustin up here to speak to you, a little bit of background on our session today. We're going to explore how cybersecurity leaders are successfully demonstrating the value of their programs through a risk-based approach. You'll gain insights into real-world examples and strategies that have secured resources, support, and budgets by effectively communicating risks to various audiences. Among the topics we'll discuss today, aligning cybersecurity with business objectives and outcomes, balancing proactive risk mitigation with regulatory compliance, and demonstrating the value of your program through audience-appropriate data and metrics. Some background on my organization. Information Security Media Group is a global education and intelligence firm. We're based in the U.S. in Princeton, New Jersey, and of course, you may know us by any number of our 37 media properties. These include Bank Info Security, Data Breach Today, and one of our newest sites, aitoday.io. In all, we reach an audience of over 1.3 million security and technology leaders globally, and we give them a daily diet of news, analysis, research, events, and educational programs just like this one. Thrilled, of course, to introduce our sponsor and our speaker, but first, a little bit of technical support. If you have any issues in viewing today's webinar, please take down the email address you see on your screen, write to webinars@ismg.io, and we've got technical support staff standing by to help. If you have any issues at all with submitting questions, you can do so right on the chat window on your screen. We may not get to every question today, but for those that we don't answer today, we'll get a response back to you via email. And reminder, today's webinar is copyrighted material meant for today's session and individual study purposes only. If you'd like to use any of it, please reach out to us independently. Thank you. And it's my delight to introduce Pondurance. Their mission is to ensure that every organization is able to detect and respond to cyber threats, regardless of size, industry, or in-house capabilities. Pondurance believes AI and automation alone aren't enough. You need ingenious human experience because attackers aren't machines. They are people. So Pondurance combines their advanced platform with decades of human intelligence to speed detection and response and contain cybersecurity threats quickly, ultimately decrease risk to your mission. Let's meet Dustin Hutchison. He's got more than 20 years of experience in information security, risk management, and regulatory compliance. Prior to joining Pondurance, he was a risk and compliance professional focusing on HIPAA, PCI, and risk assessment for new technology acquisitions ranging from infrastructure solutions to patient care devices. With that, let's welcome to the big stage here, Dustin Hutchison. Dustin, it is a pleasure to see you here again.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Dustin, give us some context here. Every cybersecurity leader, of course, wants to demonstrate their value of their cybersecurity program. They know the need to, but what's wrong with how many of them attempt to do so?
Yeah, I think one of the big problems is knowing how to show something didn't happen, right? So the concept of we were safe and here's why is, there's been a shift in that reporting. And so there's been a transition with regulatory compliance requirements. How compliant are you? And then how are we aligning with a best practice framework? And then every single organization is so different from a attack vector standpoint and the logs that they're producing and the alerts that they're producing. It's really hard to have that consistent baseline. So people tend to report on where they have visibility, and that's part of the problem.
So what's at risk if they fail to properly demonstrate value? Now, I've heard, for instance, from people in the fraud area that say, if we show that we don't have fraud, then we don't get funding. So something's disconnected there.
Right. So having that visibility, demonstrating the visibility, but then also knowing how to use the case studies of those near misses of the organizations and industries around that you can show. We are also susceptible to this. We didn't get hit with it. Here's why, and here's what we need to do to continue to improve our program. I think is one of the most important things that security leaders need to keep in mind. So know their own environment, know their house, but then also leverage the horror stories, the other bad things that are happening, not for fear, uncertainty, and doubt, but for emerging threats and risks to be pertinent.
That makes sense. So I want to talk to you about the value of a risk-based approach. I want to start here. What risk is at the basis of the approach? I'm assuming it's business risk.
Well, so the funny conversation about risk is all of it's enterprise risk, right? So you think about cybersecurity, you think of governance, you think of compliance, you think of business. There's that umbrella of enterprise risk management that everything really lives under. And so enterprise risk management is aligned with governance, but it's not IT governance. So no IT shop is there just to be an IT shop. They are there to support the mission of the organization. A lot of teams forget that. And so they think, okay, what are the tools and techniques we need to focus on from a pure cybersecurity standpoint, but then forget that they are there to serve that organization. So, having that silo is dangerous. So taking a step back and saying, what are we trying to do as an organization for our customers, our shareholders, and everybody that's involved? And so bumping up that risk conversation beyond what are the 0 days or the attacks that are happening right now. What are all the things that matter? How do you prioritize that and do something about it?
Well, Dustin, talk more about that. Should one be measuring and how frequently? Because you need to avoid the notion this is just a snapshot in time.
Well, so the problem is the amount of data that organizations have to deal with. So when you think about Pondurance, we are a managed detection and response company. So we are SOC as a service, SIM as a service. We look at all the system information within an organization: host, network, log, bring it together, aggregate it, have an understanding of what's happening in real time. That alone is a lot of data. So imagine every single user, every single system, every single machine producing data, and then being able to look at it and say something's happening or something's not happening. That's a lot of information. You need those metrics. But then you add in some of the time-based controls from a regulatory compliance perspective also that organizations need to assess and address, like vuln management and exposure management. That is not a one-time deal, and it changes constantly. So you imagine all the interactions from a user standpoint and system standpoint, those alerts, the billions that are happening, plus the vulnerability management landscape, plus any of the regulatory compliance controls that need to happen, and all those other emerging threats and things that are happening. And also on top of that, everything that your users are doing from a business email compromise or phishing or social engineering attack. So there's a lot of information that organizations could be reporting on, but having that right visibility into the metrics that matter, and then the audience appropriateness to actually make a decision about it or do something about it is really key.
So having the data is one thing. What should be reported and how should it be reported?
Right. So the people that have a vested interest in it, for one, need to have that visibility, but then also the people that can do something about it. And so back to that whole enterprise risk management or governance concept, prioritizing what your organization is going to do, not from a 1, 3, 5 year basis, but from a 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, and then up on that longer timeline is what really matters. So developing some sort of approach from a policy, procedure, practice standpoint of how do we respond to certain things that are happening in our environment. It has to be decided early, but then also you have to have enough room to reevaluate as time goes on. So vulnerability management or exposure management is the easy one to talk about. If we find critical or high risk vulnerabilities, what's the timeline that's appropriate for the organization to address those? So bubbling that up and saying this is the type of vulnerability that exists within our organization it is important. But adding in the context of that vulnerability for the organization, so an internal vulnerability versus an external vulnerability from a who can interact with it, they're two different things. So knowing how to report that to the right people is also different for every single organization. So technical teams, they can digest that in a technical, how am I going to respond to these? But then from a board standpoint or leadership standpoint, they may see that score and say, oh, that's a big deal. But you may say, oh, this is buried within the organization. There's compensating controls in front of it. And so knowing how to have that conversation is one of the things that is going to be different with every single organization.
Now, Dustin, you've mentioned governance a couple of times. What role does governance play in showing value? And how would you say that governance itself is evolving?
Well, one of the most interesting things is the NIST cybersecurity framework, or the CSF. 2.0 introduction of, reintroducing governance. I mean, the joke is it was never really gone. It's just highlighted more than ever. And I think what's important is there's more organization business alignment focus. So it's not just an IT problem. These are business problems that IT can help solve. So I think the governance focus helps bring, leadership, the non-technical leadership, especially back into the conversation from a enterprise risk management and risk tolerance standpoint to know how do we continue to do business as designed. And so governance is also, besides just the technical policy procedure approach, has brought a lot more focus on security incident response, business impact analysis, and business continuity management, which has always been important. But I think suddenly organizations from a department or business unit standpoint are realizing, oh, if IT is not available, how am I going to continue business? And so that has helped bring leadership to the table from that governance standpoint also.
Dustin, I really appreciate what you shared with us over the course of this conversation so far, but I have to ask, what are some of the gaps that need to be overcome by security leaders so they can measure and demonstrate the appropriate value of their programs?
Yeah, I think one of the main gaps is reporting that's more frequent than once a year or once a quarter. And this has been a big problem for organizations where that mindset of a once a year risk assessment is enough. It's not. It's the same thing where you shouldn't be doing, just monthly vulnerability scans. Everything is so dynamic. So I think condensing down the timeline of reporting on known issues, remediation frequency, and then also how it's changed. So just because you identified an issue in January doesn't mean it's going to be the same in February. So that ability to constantly reevaluate, but then also update from a remediation standpoint is really important. One of the things that we've done at Pondurance is introduced a platform called My Cyber Scorecard. What we're trying to do is help organizations report on a more frequent basis. So again, back to that audience appropriate reporting, we've built this on best practice frameworks. And so you look at from a control standpoint, like NIST 800-53 is a best practice control framework, but organizations need to be able to report on their compliance output also. So you think about a healthcare organization, they need to do a risk assessment based on a best practice, but they also need to know where they stand from a HIPAA security standpoint. Plus, it needs to be updated frequently enough that it's fresh. So we've integrated in not only that best practice framework, plus the regulatory, plus vendor risk management. So as an organization, you decide what are the controls that are appropriate, who needs to see those reports and that output on what frequency, but then also from a plan of action, a milestone, or remediation standpoint, have owners there with actual timelines, not just, hey, we know this exists, here's our risk register, but we are addressing this deliberately on, with a timeline, with owners and milestones in one spot. And then also, because nobody only buys systems, software suites once a year, being able to evaluate them as they are requested or come in, and then integrate them in to your risk profile, so it makes sense and you don't have this gap in analysis. So my main point is the frequency of assessment doesn't have to be burdensome. You do it kind of the right time, right size, and then you really focus on what's changing from a remediation standpoint and update standpoint, and then be able to pull those reports. If my technical teams need to do something about it, if my board or leadership wants to know where we are, and then all those ancillary teams also.
Dustin, I'm glad you started talking about Pondurance. I wanted to ask you how you are helping your customers measure and show value, and further, if you can share any best practices or even case studies.
Yeah. So what's interesting from Pondurance perspective is that we try to be, and we are, very good extension of the team, especially on the operational side for the managed detection response. But we also offer a lot more from the consulting standpoint also. So we have a vCISO practice, but Pondurance is also a PCI QSA. We are a CMMC RPO. We do a lot of business impact analysis and business continuity work. Plus, we have a full suite of technical testing. So we'll do application security testing, penetration testing, and vulnerability management. So when you take a step back and you look at a program and what it should consist of, Pondurance has a lot of answers from that operational, tactical, and strategical standpoint. And so what we try to do is, answer that problem answer that question of what the organization needs at that certain point in time, but then also from the risk-based approach perspective. So even if you hire Pondurance for the managed detection and response only, everything we do is based on the context of the organization. So being able to look at, what are the critical assets, even if you're not using this for business impact analysis or business continuity, us understanding the design and layout of your network, where do we have the appropriate visibility? What are the critical assets? What are the critical data flows? What's the critical data within your organization? It dictates the way that we operate with that organization. So it's really cohesive from the prioritization and criticality standpoint, where it's not just implement and good luck. It is a continual conversation on how can Pondurance help to reduce the risk that's ever changing within your organization.
No, I think it's a terrific topic. I love the way it's evolving. Dustin, where can our attendees go to learn more about measuring and demonstrating cybersecurity value?
Yeah, Pondurance.com is the best spot to go.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate your insight. Thank you for answering my questions.
Thank you.
I thank our attendees as well. We know you took time out of your day to attend this webinar. We're grateful for that. And I trust you're walking away with some excellent new insights on how you can measure and demonstrate the value of your own cybersecurity program. Always, I look forward to seeing you again at one of our upcoming sessions. Until then, for Information Security Media Group, I'm Tom Field. Thank you so much for your time and attention today.